Welcome, everyone, to Rutgers at the Voice of College Football. Hope everyone's doing great tonight. We've got the link to the show in the chat if you'd like to call in, discuss Rutgers football or college football generally. And tonight, we're going to be discussing three topics. First, a season recap of the Scarlet Knights football program and results. Number two, an assessment of the Rutgers football program at this juncture. And number three, more generally, some college football news, particularly in light of these selections for the college football playoff. So let's get right to it. And if you like the show, hit that like and subscribe button. We appreciate it. Look forward to your comments and hope you call in to have a very, very spirited debate. Okay, so let's get to our first topic. Season recap for Rutgers. Well, where do we begin? We begin where it ended, in East Lansing, Michigan. Rutgers with a 41-14 victory over the Michigan State Spartans. Before I get into the statistics, team and individual, I spent 4 years in Fort Wayne, Indiana. It was interesting, a bit dreary. Spent some time in Michigan, went to East Lansing, didn't like it. Ann Arbor is the place to be, but I digress. So, as I said, ended the regular season with a 41-14 victory over the Michigan State Spartans. Let's talk about the team statistics. Total yards. Rutgers 365, Michigan State 253. Passing yards 157 for Rutgers, 150 for the Spartans. Rushing yards 103 for Michigan State, 208 for Rutgers. Yards per play 5.2 for Rutgers, 5.3 for Michigan State. First downs, Rutgers 24, Michigan State 13. Third down efficiency, 7 of 13 for Rutgers, over 50%. Only 3 of 9 for Michigan State, 33%. Fourth down efficiency, Rutgers 1 for 1, Michigan State 0 for 3. Total plays, get this, 70 for Rutgers and only 48 for the Spartans. Time of possession, 35 minutes, 8 seconds for Rutgers, 24 minutes, 52 seconds for Michigan State. Sparty did not have a good day in dreary East Lansing. Individual statistics, let's talk about those. Rutgers quarterback, Ethan Kaliakmanis, 13 of 22 for 157 yards and a touchdown. A decent day, not a great day. Star running back Kyle Monangai out of Don Bosco Prep, 31 carries, 129 yards for a 4.2 yards per carry average and 1 touchdown. Antoine Raymond, another Don Bosco Prep product. And I went to rival high school, Bergen Catholic, but Don Bosco deserves credit where it's due. 9 carries, 71 yards, 7.9 yards per carry average, 2 touchdowns. Wide receivers, Ian Strong, 4 receptions for 55 yards and a touchdown. Daimir Miller, 4 receptions, 48 yards, and KJ Duff, 4 receptions for 21 yards. So, what did Coach Schiano have to say at the post-game press conference? Well, he didn't mince words. He said that this team was the most mentally tough group of players that he has ever coached. And given where Schiano has coached, that says something. Most mentally tough group, particularly because of the injuries that have decimated the team, particularly the defense throughout the year. He said the victory in the season generally is a great advancement for the program. And he praised the players for what? For living up to CHOP. What does he mean? The Rutgers mantra to keep working hard, keep chopping away, even when it's hard, even when you don't want to, even when you're facing adversity. He said this team exemplifies CHOP in its greatest sense. Said the players never blinkered, never wavered despite the challenges they faced. Like I said, terrible, terrible slew of injuries. And, while saying he was so proud of the players and of the group, particularly the seniors who were recruited during COVID over an 11-day period, Coach Schiano did seem a bit, I don't want to say regretful, but somewhat nostalgic about what could have been. He said this group had very high goals. And this group would have had a better record if it were not for those injuries. He said, but woulda, coulda, shoulda. You can't go back and change the past. And I think he's right. Rutgers was affected by a plethora of injuries that ultimately did affect it. And without those injuries, we might be talking about Rutgers in a playoff rather than Rutgers in, and I'll get to this later, the Rate Bowl. I'll get to that later. Okay, so they end the season with Michigan State 7-5 overall, 4-5 in the Big Ten. They began the season with a 44-7 victory over Howard, and then a 49-17 victory over Akron. Virginia Tech on the road, they win in Blacksburg 26-23, and then Washington comes into Piscataway, and Rutgers pulls off the victory 21-18. So at this point, Rutgers football perennially at the bottom of their respective conference is 4-0 with victories over Washington and Virginia Tech. Then I started this show, and Rutgers went on a 4-game losing streak. Lincoln, Nebraska, Rutgers loses 14-7. Heartbreaking loss. They had the ball on the 2-yard line, first and goal with Kyle Monangai in the backfield. Couldn't punch it in. Missed a field goal. Faked a field goal. Didn't work. Heartbreaking loss. Then Wisconsin, a very bad Wisconsin team, along with Luke Fickell, comes into Piscataway, and inexplicably Rutgers goes down 42-7, a 35-point loss. Next week in Piscataway, the Bruins of UCLA, Ethan Garber's at quarterback for UCLA. A very poor UCLA team manages to pull off the victory by 3 points, 35-32. And then the next week, the Scarlet Knights go across the country to the University of Southern California Trojans, where they lose 42-20 in a very bruising and physical game where Kyle Monangai suffers a head injury and is knocked out of the game. So now we're at 4-4. And people are starting to wonder, is this the old Rutgers again? Are we reverting back to mediocrity, or dare I say worse? Well, it sure looked like that. And at that point, we have 4 games left. So how's Rutgers going to respond? What is Rutgers going to do? Well, to their credit, Rutgers did respond. Minnesota, the Golden Gophers and P.J. Fleck come to Piscataway on a winning streak, one of the hottest teams in college football, and Rutgers wins the game 26-19 to improve to 5-4. Then Rutgers goes to Maryland to take on the very mediocre Maryland Terrapins 31-17. So we're back 2-game winning streak. And then the heartbreak came again in Piscataway against a very below average Fighting Illini team, University of Illinois. Rutgers has the lead late. Illinois has the ball at midfield, 4th and 6. They convert. And not only do they convert, they score. 48-yard touchdown pass with 8 seconds to go, down 31-30. And Rutgers loses. That was the proverbial nail in the coffin for many. Very, very difficult loss, along with the loss in Nebraska. They go to 6-5, but they do respond once again, echoing Greg Schiano's sentiment that this is a team that keeps chopping, keeps overcoming adversity, and keeps staying resilient. 41-14 to finish 7-5 on the season, 4-5 in the Big Ten. Okay, so what does this mean? Well, it means that Rutgers is going on December 26th, the day after Christmas, to the Rate Bowl to face Kansas State, a pretty good Kansas State team. Now, I don't know about all of you, but let's just digress for a second. They're going to the Rate Bowl. Now, I think I've been pretty tolerant, listening to things like the Cheez-It Bowl, the Chick-fil-A Bowl, the Pinstripe Bowl. You know, I don't know who names these bowls, but I assume the people that are responsible for naming them are probably pretty wealthy and successful in the corporate world. And then they come up with these nonsensical names. The Rate Bowl, what the hell does that mean? I have no idea what it means. If that's the best that these people can do, no wonder we have such high inflation, gas prices, and house prices. Forget about it. Have some common sense for a change. But we're not going to penalize Rutgers or Kansas State for that utterly ridiculous name. They will be going to the Rate Bowl on December 26th, looking to close out the season 8-5. So that's the recap of the season. And as we look forward to next season, it does bear repeating that on this show and on future shows, we're going to be talking about recruiting. So as we look ahead, where is Rutgers in the recruiting process? Well, currently, Rutgers, number 30 in the country in recruiting. 3 stars. Rutgers has 26 3 stars committed. They have 1 4-star. And you know where I'm going? I'm going to the 5 stars now. How many 5 stars do you think they have? I don't think we need a drum roll for this. 0. None. It reminds me a bit of Iowa. Iowa, a great program at developing players. Historically has achieved far more success, of course, than Rutgers. That ends up with a grade of 87.952 from On3. And like I said, we'll be having future shows dedicated to recruiting specific players and projections about transfer portal and possible additions in recruitment. 26 3 stars is great. 1 4-star, not good enough. 0 5 stars, not good enough. Rutgers, start buying players from the portal. Start paying players out of high school. We need 3 or 4 5 stars. Once you set that precedent that you can get 5 stars, there's going to be a domino effect. And then more 5 stars are going to come. And then you're going to start winning more. And when you start winning more 5 stars want to come. And you start filling the stadium and making more revenue, meaning you can pay these players. So either you're committed to a recipe for success or a recipe for mediocrity. And that brings me back to our second topic. Assessment of Rutgers football. Well, let me just say as we begin this segment that Coach Greg Schiano deserves a tremendous amount of credit. And Coach, we look forward to having you on the show. Did a tremendous job this year. And it bears repeating that when Schiano came to Rutgers from 2001 to 2011, he inherited a program in shambles. And in only 4 years, he rehabilitated the program and made it nationally relevant, where we beat legitimate teams and were taken seriously, turned the program around, and did a fantastic job. He then left, of course, as you all know, and we endured more years of what Rutgers has historically been. Bad, bottom of their respective conference. Rutgers fans and the entire state of New Jersey was forced to endure the Chris Ash era. I need not traumatize you with any more information about that. But Schiano comes back, and what is Greg Schiano doing? He's doing the exact same thing he did during his first stint from 2001 to 2011. He's turning the program around. Once again, in his 4th year, Rutgers has turned their record around and is now on an upward trajectory, 7-5. So, Coach Schiano, congratulations to you. I know it's been difficult with the injuries and with, you don't have the same resources that an Ohio State, a Georgia, and Alabama does. But credit to you and for some of the victories you've had this year, which were impressive. So that brings me to my first question. 3 questions about assessing Rutgers football right now. Number 1, is a 7-5 record considered a good year for Rutgers? Now, some Rutgers fans, particularly those that endured the Chris Ash era, and, well, let's just be honest, the vast majority of Rutgers football existence, when Rutgers was at the bottom of the conference, might say 7-5 was a success. I would say this, and this is a very difficult conclusion to come to. Is 7-5 good this year? No. we could have and should have accomplished so much more. And I'll tell you why. This is a year where we had a very senior-laden team, a lot of guys with experience, especially on the defensive side. Number two, and I cannot stress this enough, we had a pretty easy schedule, okay? We didn't have to play Oregon. We didn't have to play Ohio State, okay? We had UCLA, not that they were very good, but we had UCLA at home. We had Washington at home. We had Minnesota at home. We had Illinois at home. Okay, this was the year with the seniors and with the favorable schedule that we should have gotten the job done. And when you look at our losses, 14-7 in Lincoln, Nebraska, 35-32 against UCLA, and then with 6 seconds left, losing on the last play touchdown pass against the Fighting Illini, not a great team by any means. What does that mean? It means we should have been 10-2. And I say that despite the injuries. And why do I say that? Because we were that close. We were 6 feet away from tying the game against Nebraska in Lincoln, and we couldn't punch it in. We missed a field goal. We faked the field goal. It didn't work. All right? We were 1 play away from beating the Fighting Illini. We were 3 points away from defeating UCLA. Okay, this season could have and should have been 10-2. Now, I'm not blaming Coach Schiano. I'm not blaming the players. He's right. They deserve a ton of credit for persevering through a very, very uncharacteristic level of injuries. But as in football, as in life, no excuses. Next man up. You still have to keep chopping, as Rutgers would tell you. So those losses mean that the season was pretty good, but significantly dampened by what we know could have been and, in fact, should have been. So if I had to say, were we good? It was okay. Season was okay. What grade would I give the team? I'd give the team a B-. Second question, what's the future look like? Is the future going to – and this is a critical question. What's the future going to look like for Rutgers? Because Rutgers is at a crossroads right now. For years, decades, over half a century, Rutgers was the laughingstock of college football. But in Schiano's first stint, Rutgers became relevant. In his second stint, they're becoming relevant again. But can they sustain it? Can they continue it? Can Rutgers compete with the Ohio States, the Oregons? Or is Rutgers going to remain in perpetuity the poster child for mediocrity or worse? Well, like I've said on other shows and will continue to say, that depends on 3 things. Developing your players, buying players from the portal and from high school in the recruiting process, okay, and winning and placing players in the NFL and thereby presenting 5 stars with a package that leads to success at Rutgers and in life and financial security. Before I move on, we have a caller. We have Duriel, a great commentator, and thrilled that he's here. So, Duriel, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm good. How about you?
I'm doing great. So, what are your thoughts?
My thoughts are the season overall, I'd give it a B-. B. It wasn't anything fantastic, but the critical stretch was that 4 games where you lost to Nebraska, Wisconsin, UCLA, and USC. You just split that and go 2-2. Arguably, a decent or good football team would go 3-1 in that schedule, and this whole season has a different outlook at 9-3, 10-2. But unfortunately, the wheels really fell off after the Nebraska loss, and losing to UCLA was just unacceptable. They're just a bad football team. I know they improved somewhat at the end of the season, but you all should have won that game. I'll give you a pass on the Illinois loss because Illinois, even though it was heartbreaking, they're a good football team. They are a legit football team. They competed well with Penn State for most of the game. They were only 1 possession away. Now, Penn State did dominate the game, but the scoreboard is the ultimate factor, so I'm going to go by that. So I think you all were a better team this year, but I think you left some missed opportunities out there on the field.
I think you're 100% right, and that's what really hurts because even though I didn't attend Rutgers, I am from New Jersey, and, even people who don't attend Rutgers who live in New Jersey, they're rooting for the Scarlet Knights. And for years, we've basically endured being at the bottom of our whatever conference, Big Ten, whatever, Big East back when, always been at the bottom of the conference. So this was one of those years where, for the first time, I think ever, Rutgers actually had a chance to be 10-2, and with the schedule that it had and the seniors that we had, there was a lot of optimism. But then it's very difficult to accept the loss to Nebraska and how the little things really got us in those games, whether it was Nebraska, UCLA, or Illinois on the last play of the game. It's like when you have the opportunity to do something special, it's heartbreaking when you come this close but don't succeed. What do you think about Rutgers going forward? Do you think that they're going to just sink back to what they were, or they can build on this?
I think next year, though, they should have a better team, but their schedule, man. I'm not sure if you've looked at the 2025 schedule. Oh, my goodness. It's brutal. I did,
and I looked away.
Yeah, it's you got a lot of tough games. Let me put it that way. You will be battle tested in the Big Ten. Yeah. So I think your record could be worse, but I think your players will be better, if that makes sense.
That makes total sense. And I noticed that we're playing Oregon at home, so I already have my plane ticket to fly up to Piscataway and see if we can stop the Oregon Ducks. I think the answer to that is no. And that's why, looking to the schedule this year, I thought outside of the USC game, I didn't think we'd win that game. I thought we would drop another game, but that 4-game losing streak, like you said, if we just split, and then the loss, well, I could go on and on. Here's my concern, Duriel, and this is what a lot of people don't talk about. Greg Schiano is in his mid-50s. He's coached in a lot of places. He's been the best fit for Rutgers, kind of like the Pete Carroll of Rutgers. But he's going to retire at some point, and I think that point's going to come within the next 5 years. Then what happens to Rutgers? Do you think that Rutgers could get a top-flight coach that can continue the program's upward trajectory?
Well, I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball in the future. I've stopped giving up on that a long time ago with these conference realignments and stuff. So I don't know what's going to happen in the sport next year, much less 5 years, with everything changing all of a sudden. Yeah. So I don't even know if Rutgers can be in the Big Ten. If somebody from the future say, hey, Rutgers has been demoted to the Big 12, I'll believe them, because anything's possible at this rate. So I would just worry about your team this year and the next year and just build on that. Just continue building in order to get a top flight head coach. I don't think we need to be looking too far ahead.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. And I think we got to focus on sustaining the success, because that's going to impact recruitment. And I think, like when I was talking about how we've got 26 3-stars, but only 1 4-star and 0 5-stars. Well, if we start winning, and if the university makes a commitment to buy players and compete with the big schools, I think that could happen. But I think it's uncertain whether it will. So we'll see what happens. Just like we're going to see what happens in this college football playoff, which I'm not sure how you feel about the committee's selections, but I have problems with both the formula used to select them and the selections that were made. What do you think?
I just hate it all around. Everybody, I don't know if I'm living in a different universe than everybody else or whatnot. Everybody's talking about how great these matchups are and how all these teams can win the national championships. And I'm just like, did you all see the football schedule? And some of these teams with buys that clearly aren't good enough to deserve buys, like Boise State, Arizona State. In my opinion, a large of this is just a joke. And can we get at least the simple basic fact that if you're the number 1 team in the country, you should have the easiest path to win it all? Can we at least do that? No, we can't even do that.
Exactly. It's utterly ridiculous. Arizona State was ranked, 16? And Boise State was ranked, I believe, 12. And
Boise State was 9, Arizona State was 12, I believe, and Clemson was 16.
And so Arizona State and Boise State, clearly nowhere near the top 2 teams, gets a bye. I don't understand that. In my world, the top team gets a bye. So, and like the top, 4 buys, the top 4 teams get the 4 buys. And also, some of those first-round games, I'm really not excited about. I mean, I guess I'm excited about Indiana, Notre Dame, but the one game I'm excited about is Tennessee and Ohio State. But I'm not really.
That's the only game I'm excited about that I expect to be somewhat close. But Like, the way I do this is if we're looking at this as a regular season slate of game, who's going to circle? Oh my goodness, Penn State is playing SMU. Who's circling that game and saying, "Man, this is the game of the week"? Nobody's doing that.
Yeah, I mean, couldn't they? I mean, if they were going to select these teams, could they have not at least matched them up a little bit better? Penn State and SMU. I mean, that's just on its face sounds unappealing, and so does Clemson and Texas. I mean, like I said, Notre Dame, Indiana. But
I mean, Tennessee, it's regional, but other than that, I don't see any way Indiana's going to win this football game. Like, they don't have the depth, they don't have the talent, they don't have the skill. If Indiana Notre Dame, runs inside zone every single play, I believe they win the game by 14 at least. Like we saw against.
I think so too. And no, Michigan. Michigan had a great defense this year, but that quarterback problem killed them. But here's the thing: so we have Indiana, Boise State, Arizona State, but South Carolina's on the sidelines. Ole Miss is on the sidelines. Can you please explain that to me? Because I think South Carolina would kick Indiana's ass and Boise State's. I mean, are we not trying to put the 12 best teams in? Because these are not the 12 best teams. Do you agree with that?
Oh, I don't think it's inarguable. These aren't the 12 best teams. I mean, if you look at the playoff committee's own rankings, Alabama is currently 11th in the country, but not in the college football playoff. So that point's inarguable. Yeah. But we're doing this high-minded approach theory, which in my opinion killed the Pac-12, that we have to treat everybody as equal and therefore everybody deserves a bye and stuff. And it's like, no. This isn't the AFC versus the NFC. The Big 12 is an irrelevant dumpster fire of a conference. The ACC is slightly better than that. The Big 10 and SEC are significantly better than those two. And for us all to ignore reality and view these conferences on the same level is laughable. Here's my favorite thing of non-conference play. I don't know if you realize this. Arizona State in non-conference play played the worst SEC in the country. Team in the country, Mississippi State. They beat them by 7 points. A team that went 0-8 in non-conference play. Arizona State, then the following week, went on the road to play Texas State. Not Texas Tech, not TCU, not Texas. Texas State. And they won by 3 points. 3.
God.
They went 7-5 in the Sun Belt. The Sun Belt.
This is the problem. No, and if the goal was to get the 12 best teams and the committee failed, I mean, you said treat everyone equally. I don't want to treat everyone equally. I'm going to tell you why. Because their schedules are different, and the strength of their schedules are so different. You put Arizona State, Boise State in the SEC, I'm sorry, they're going to have 4 and 5 losses. And if you put the top teams if you put Georgia, say, in Alabama or Texas in the Big 12, they're going to be undefeated or with 1 loss. So why in God's name would you have automatic bids for conference champions when their conference is terrible? Can you explain that?
I don't get it. It's just the only thing I've told you the reason. It's just a stupid reason, in my opinion. Similar to Brett Yormark's comments that the Arizona State, Iowa State, okay, they went 2-0 against the Big Ten and SEC teams they faced, and Boise State went 0-1. Therefore, I guess in his mind, the Big 12 is better, despite those 2 games being against Iowa and Mississippi State. Meanwhile, Boise State lost by 3 on the road to the number 1 team in the country. So all everybody's doing is just picking facts that suit their opinion. Everybody's just living in their own silos. And the one positive thing I will say about this, Adam, is these teams, I believe, are going to get crushed. Like, we're going to see 25, 35, 45-point blowouts. And I hope everybody with that moment and level of clarity understands the system cannot continue going forward.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be the blessing in disguise, because when they get crushed, the committee is going to realize the error of its ways. And I think they're also going to revisit automatic bids and automatic buys, because it makes no sense. When I think of Boise State having a bye, while Texas and Notre Dame have to play in the first round, It makes no sense to me, and I don't understand. The purpose of the 12-team playoff was to improve the system. Instead, all it's doing is perpetuating the same problem. So let me ask you this question. I've said previously that because of the disparity in schedule strength, I might put in a team with 3 losses from the SEC over a team, say, with 1 loss from the Big 12. Do you think I'm wrong?
I think you're 100% spot on. I think the Big Ten also should get that level of treatment. If there's a 9-3 Big Ten team, let's say Rutgers next year, they go 9-3. They lose in a competitive game against Ohio State, Oregon, and Penn State. Put them in the playoffs. They belong. Yeah. They've proven more in those losses than a team in the Big 12 could possibly prove.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And it just bothers me, too, that teams are penalized so heavily for losing earlier in the season when over the course of a season they improved tremendously. South Carolina is the hottest team in college football right now. But the committee absolutely would not put them in over Ole Miss. An Ole Miss team that only 3 weeks ago lost to 5-loss Florida. So it's like they think so inside the box and don't use their common sense, and that's why you have what you have here. So I don't know. I guess I'll watch the games, but I am not really as excited as I hoped we'd be.
Yeah, I'm not excited either. The only game I'm somewhat interested in is Ohio State versus Tennessee because I think that is a legit top 10 matchup in the country. None of these other games, I believe, are legit top even 15 games. I don't believe Clemson, SMU, or Indiana is one of the 15 best teams in the country. I just don't. So no, I think.
Did you see what? Go ahead.
I think they're going to get railroaded, so I'm looking forward to seeing the reactions. That's what I'm
exactly. And did you see what Louisville did to Clemson on Clemson's home field? I mean, Clemson is not one of the 12 best teams. Now, as far as Tennessee and Ohio State goes, I think Tennessee matches up extremely well and could beat Ohio State, but for Nico at quarterback for Tennessee. He's a real talent, but I think he's a freshman and may not have the experience and may struggle in Columbus. What do you think?
Well, I think that's very possible. I think Ohio State's one of the 3 most talented teams in the country, 3 to 5 most talented teams in the country. I think Ohio State's going to play with their hair on fire, similar to what they did in 2022, I believe it was, when they played Georgia in the semifinal game. I think if anybody blows out the other team, I think it'll be Ohio State because they've got the offensive weapons, unlike Tennessee, which, listen, I hate the system, so I consider me the villain, I guess. I'm rooting for as many humiliating blowouts as possible, and I'm rooting for the SEC or Big Ten just to absolutely blow everybody out from the other conferences just so everybody in those fan bases and those silos can realize they don't belong, because the empirical data and evidence, in my opinion, already shows they don't belong. But I guess they can't understand it until they get blown out by 40, 50 points on the football field. So it is what it is.
It's like everything else in life, right? You have to. People have to wait until there's a catastrophe before they are, motivated to change, even when it's obvious. And I think that you're right. If that happens, I mean, I might support a system where you have 2 automatic buys for the Big Ten and the SEC, but that's it, or bids. But the way this is, I think the committee is there's going to be blowouts, and it will expose the flaws of the committee's approach. So, listen, thanks for. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, this format really screws a team like Rutgers, Kentucky, and those type level teams that's just underneath, because everybody's already complains about SEC, Big Ten bias and all that stuff, so they just want to see us lose. They don't want to see themselves win, they just hate us more. That's what I've come to realize, especially if you've seen the reactions of stuff, everybody literally celebrating, like, oh my gosh, the SEC only got 3 teams, therefore they're in a relevant conference now, therefore they're complete trash. So it's going to hurt us because their bias is going to go toward the underdog. Even though nobody cares about the underdog, nobody watches the underdog, nobody roots for the underdog, it's going to really hurt you all and us. And it hurt Alabama this year.
It really did. And I think it's one of those cases where people hate teams that are always successful. And how many SEC teams won the national championship over the last 20 years. So there's this like hatred of the SEC, and every opportunity people get to knock them down, they do. But the truth is, the SEC is the best conference in college football, and the second best conference is the Big Ten. And you know, I wish people were more balanced and objective in their analysis, because I kind of feel like a lot of the bias that you just spoke of is embedded in this formula that put Alabama out, put Ole Miss out, and put South Carolina out. 3 teams that would all have beaten, in my view, SMU, Boise State, and Arizona State. How can you say that the playoff is legit when the best teams aren't playing? I don't know.
No, and this is going to really hurt not only the first round, but the second round as well, because you're going to have in the second round more than likely Penn State playing Boise State, Texas playing Clemson, and then Georgia playing Notre Dame, Indiana. Who out of those 3 games, I think the obvious favorite is going to be Georgia, Texas, and Penn State. We're going to have 6 of the 8 games probably at a minimum be complete blowouts. And I was told through the system that there's not going to be any blowout. There's going to be less blowouts because we're going to have more games. I'm looking at it, I'm just seeing, man, I'm seeing a lot of 49-14 level scores. I'm just like, where is it? How come Georgia's path, okay? They don't play. The best team they could possibly play is the number 4 team in the country to make the national championship game. How is that even possible? In a theoretical sense, that's crazy.
Yeah, I saw that, and I was laughing because Georgia has such a superior competitive advantage because of where they're placed that, I mean, it defeats. So the likelihood of a team advancing to the national championship game depends more on chance than it does on reason. And I think that's ridiculous, and I think we're going to see a lot of blowouts. And my broader problem with this whole approach is let's just cut to the chase here. All right, SMU is not going to win the national championship. Indiana is not going to win the national championship. Penn State is not going to win the national championship. Boise State certainly isn't winning the national championship. Yet they're in a playoff for the national championship. I don't get it. I mean, I know it's about money, but if it's about money, all I'll say is it seems that that's all that it's about, because those teams, I mean, geez, maybe Penn State, but SMU, Boise State, give me a break. Why are they even in a playoff? Why do we need 12 teams?
That's a great question. Did you watch the After Dark show last night?
I watched, most of it.
They were talking about it. I don't know what part it was. They were talking about how they wouldn't be surprised if anybody won in the first round or if anybody won the national championship. And I'm just like pulling my hair out thinking, really? Clemson's going to win the national championship this year? Really? They're going to beat Texas, Arizona State, Oregon or Ohio State most likely, and then probably Georgia. Really? They're going to do that this year when they haven't beaten any team on that level outside of Arizona State. Really? SMU's going to win it this year. Really? It's just ridiculous what I think people are trying to hope and believe. I think people are just putting their hopes and beliefs in a system that's clearly flawed. But what do you think?
I think that people really want to believe things that will suit their narrative, so they will pick at any fact that can support it and ignore contrary facts. I mean, you mentioned Clemson. It's so obvious that Clemson will not win the national championship because of their performance in the second half against SMU, particularly the fourth quarter. They were completely dominated by SMU. Outscored, I believe, 17-7 in the fourth quarter. Oh, and they're going to, and so therefore Clemson is going to go into Austin, Texas, and beat. No, it's not going to happen. Boise State is going to, let's see, Boise State plays the winner of SMU Penn State. Boise State's going to beat Penn State? No. And if SMU wins, is SMU going to beat Boise State? Then I could see SMU advancing, but then they're still going to eventually lose. It's like March Madness, where the Cinderella teams, they get to the Sweet 16, maybe once in a while the Elite 8, until they run up against the juggernaut, and away they go. That's why I don't think we need a 12-team playoff, because half of the teams have near zero chance of winning.
That's what I've been saying I've been waving this flag for about a year and a half. I think 4 was a bit too much, honestly. If Texas won the SEC championship game this year, think there's a strong argument just have Oregon, Texas play for the national championship game, and nobody else is a gripe about anything. Like,
I would agree with that. I've kind of argued before that I think it should go back to a 14 playoff, but I would absolutely support 1 versus 2 at the conclusion of the regular season. I mean, if you look historically, how many years was there a huge controversy about who should be 1 and 2? I think there was a fair amount of consensus. It's when you start expanding it that there's these controversies between 4 and 5 or 12 or 13. Why not just have the coaches and AP poll pick 1 and 2 and then they go at it? I don't like they used to. Because if we think we've improved our system with the BCS and now this nonsense, the truth is we haven't, as you see in the controversy that erupts every week and every year. So why not just go back to the old system and, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Right. Well, money's obviously the most important reason, but I know you've been advocating for this weird model and I think it's a good model. I think it's weird because it's nobody's talked about it. Weird isn't a pejorative in this sense.
Yeah,
a compliment actually. It's you at the end of the season you decide how many teams fit in the playoff. I don't think that's possible or would work just because of the simplicity of people and the marketability of it. But
right.
A model that I've seen, and I'm not sure, I haven't heard you talk about or discuss it all, is the +1 model. Have you heard of the +1 model?
I've heard of it, but explain it to me in this context how it would work.
So you would have your bowl games, the New Year's Six bowl games played out, and then at the end of that, you have the AP writers and the playoff committee decide who's in the national championship game. And half the teams are going to eliminate themselves because they're going to lose. And then it's going to be pretty obvious, in my opinion, who the number 1 and 2 teams are. So if Oregon won, they would obviously be in because they're undefeated. And then the only argument would be Notre Dame or Georgia, but it wouldn't even be that much of an argument because you would just have those 2 teams kind of go ahead to have, and then the winner goes on in the bowl.
Was this an idea that was floated like in the late 90s? Because I
don't know.
I don't have a problem with that system at all. I think that would resolve the controversy. I've also kind of argued for a play-in game between, like, I've advocated for a 4-team playoff, and what I've seen is that there's always this division and controversy about who should be number 4, whether it's TCU or Alabama, Florida State or Alabama after Travis got hurt. So why not just have 4 and 5 play an extra game for that 4th spot so that people aren't going to be arguing about it? Why is that so unrealistic?
Well, I think it would work. It's just the time frame, but that honestly isn't even much of an issue to me. My biggest concern, and I think, is somebody will then complain about 6 not being in the play-in game.
I gotcha. So it's like it's a cycle that's just going to keep repeating itself. I do, with regard to your comments about like my idea that why should we have a set number of teams every year? I think in an ideal world, I would say as the committee, there might be 2 teams this year. There might be 20 teams. We're going to pick the best teams that have a realistic chance of competing for the national championship, and that number is going to change every year. And if you look historically, certainly people would disagree about how many would compete for the national championship, but more would agree on the teams that have a reasonable chance. Then the problem is the logistics. How the hell do you do that if you pick 3 teams? And that I see that as the problem, but I'm one of those people like, hey, if the idea is good, we'll find a way. But that's never going to happen because I guarantee the committee would never think that way because they want something clear and straightforward and simple, regardless if it has negative consequences. Do you think that's right?
I think that's right, and I think we also need to remember we're hardcore college football fans. We do in-depth analysis. I don't think your average college football fan looks at the bracket and picks out these little indiscrepancies and stuff. So I think it'll be very difficult for the casual college football fan to say who's in the playoff. And then have it explained to them, well, we don't know because we're waiting to the end of the year to determine it. So I think that's ultimately the reason it's not going to be implemented is because of the casual fans. And no matter how much you may dislike that, the casual fans is what drives the sport ultimately, because there's millions and millions more of them than us.
You're 100% right, and that is the reality. Well, listen, thanks so much for calling into the show. Great discussion as always. I appreciate your comments and your intelligence. Please call in again, and thanks for contributing to the show.
Yeah, no problem. Get those After Dark people in line and tell them Clemson can't win it all, man.
I'm going to do that. Absolutely. Thanks, Duriel. All right, everyone. That was Duriel. He's a great person and very intelligent and informed college football fan. And as fate would have it, just as Duriel leaves, we have another caller. We have Ryan. Ryan, welcome to the show. Thanks for calling in. So, what are your thoughts on this college football playoff chaos?
I think the committee finally got it right.
You think the committee got it right? Okay. A different opinion here. We like different opinions. We welcome different perspectives. So, please, you have the floor. Tell me why.
I mean, one through probably 7 or 8, I think was never a doubt to anybody. The only contentious spot was 12, and
yeah.
I said this when they made the decision, but Dallas decided to party like it's the 1980s.
Back. Yeah, speaking of that, the 1980s, for anyone that's watching or will watch this recorded broadcast, was the best decade in history. And then we went downhill with the 90s, and then everything went off the hook after. Anyway, I digress. So I get what you're saying. You're saying that reasonable people would agree on the majority of the teams. I would agree with that, but I would say to you that number would be about 6 teams, at most 8 teams. So what I've argued in the past is that the playoff committee should not set a specific number of teams who make the playoff every year. They should say, in one year, 2 teams might make it. In another year, 20 teams or 15 teams. We're going to pick the teams that have a reasonable chance of winning it all, instead of having this uniform 12-team requirement where we have teams like Indiana and SMU and Boise State who have 0 chance of winning. Would you agree that even though it's more nuanced, that might be a better approach?
Well, and frankly, I think that the committee has set a standard.
Yeah.
And they've kind of operationalized how they're going to do things. And I think it rewards teams. I mean, people can say what they want about Boise State. But I'm a believer in the Broncos. I will say they have one. They have
Denver Broncos.
No, the Boise State Broncos.
Well, they do have a blue field.
They do, but that's not. Their one loss is to the number 1 team in the country by 3 points.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Arizona State, Kenny Dillingham has those boys fired up. They're one of the hottest teams in the country, and I think on their day they can beat anybody. Indiana is an interesting case because they're 11-1. You can't leave an 11-1 team who plays in the Power 4 out. You can't. I get their schedule was weak, but Ohio State beat Nebraska by 3. Indiana beat Nebraska by like 40.
True. Very true.
Indiana beat Michigan. Michigan beat Ohio State.
Well, I think you make some really good points that cause me to reconsider, because I think the benefit of what you're arguing is that even if the 12-team playoff may be over-inclusive in including a couple of teams that don't have a realistic chance at winning, it's better to be over-inclusive because you're still going to ensure that you have the best teams in there, but you're also going to put teams in there that you don't know. Like, you just don't know. So maybe that's, it's not like we're leaving teams out. And if the complaint is we're including too many teams, so what? We're still encompassing the best teams. All right, that's a fair point. So here's what I think. I think the goal should be to have the 12 best teams. I don't think this does it. Hey, Mr. GT, I see you there in the comments. Thanks for being here. South Carolina, to me, has a real chance of winning. I have SEC bias. I'm not sure if your bias is towards the Big 12 or the Big 10, but I think you called on previously, and I believe you're an SEC guy, right?
I am, yeah.
Okay. And what's your – wait, Georgia, right?
Yes, correct.
My condolences on Mr. Beck. Let's hope that Gunnar Stockton uses his legs more and throws a bit less. But Georgia looks like a powerhouse. That defense is healthier.
Yep.
And they are a juggernaut.
You know, it hurts. As much as people kind of talk bad about him, and Carson Beck didn't have the best year. I mean, at the end of the day, he still got us here. And it sucks to see the season end with a torn, what is believed to be a torn UCL, which is an injury you almost never see in quarterbacks.
Is the UCL is that the back of the knee?
No, UCL is the elbow. It's the ulterior
elbow.
cruciate. That's when pitchers get Tommy John surgery in baseball. That's what it's repairing.
Is it on his throwing arm?
Yes.
Oh, so he's probably out. The only reason I said knee is because I know the knee has the ACL, LCL, PCL,
MCL.
Yeah. All right, but here's the thing about Beck. He was a little inconsistent this year. Against Alabama, his first half was horrible, but in the second half, he looked like an NFL quarterback, and I think he's going to be a pretty good NFL quarterback. But I don't think Georgia is going to be affected that much, if at all. I think Stockton will do a manageable job, and what's going to win Georgia the national championship is going to be the defense and Etienne and Nate Frazier, as long as he can manage. Yeah. So you're in a good position.
You know, I'd argue we had a bigger loss Saturday, and that was our punter.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Brett Thorson's out for the year with a non-contact injury in his left knee, which I would argue is a much bigger loss to Georgia. Because I mean, that guy, you know, we'd be back up on our own 10, 15-yard line, and he's flipped the field, and all of a sudden we're playing defense from our opponent's 25.
Yeah. Yeah. He reminds me of that Australian punter from the Alabama, averages over 60 yards a punt or something. Or
Mm-hmm.
I think I think Georgia when Georgia lost to Alabama, everybody thought Georgia, Alabama owns Georgia. No, Georgia was injured across the board on defense.
Yes.
And I said to my friends, once Georgia gets healthy, watch out. Because if you noticed what happened in Austin and on Saturday, they are making Texas look pedestrian. They're out-physicaling Texas.
Yeah.
And I think Texas is a very physical team. So I would say Georgia right now, especially with the draw, is in the driver's seat. But I have totally. But I will admit that at the beginning of the year, I made a national championship prediction and then had insults hurled at me. I said Notre Dame's going to win it all this year. And then after Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois, you know, everyone came out of the woodwork calling me crazy, an idiot, and all these things. And sure enough, Notre Dame sits here at number 5. I think Notre Dame's the dark horse to win it all. What do you think?
Yeah, I can see it. They're extremely talented on the ground. With Riley Leonard, Jeremiah Love, they've got really good O-line. That defense is great. That secondary is dangerous. But Notre Dame's problem is, and I've been kind of saying this all year, their competition, while on paper looks good, but I mean, their best wins are Army and Navy.
Yeah.
And I respect the service academies. They had great years, but that's not. I mean, I think they'll probably handle Indiana okay. But even then, Kirk Cignetti, I mean, he's got that team airing the ball out. So that secondary is going to get tested. And then if they win, they come see us in Dallas.
Yep. And that's what I was just going to say, that their secondary is vulnerable. And you even saw that against USC, and USC kept it close. The problem for Notre Dame is if Notre Dame gets by Georgia, I think they're going to win it all. The problem, I think, for Notre Dame, and I think for every team that's going to face Georgia, is Georgia's defensive line and Georgia's schemes on defense. Was it Glenn Schumann? I mean, they cause offensive coordinators so many headaches because of how nuanced their scheme is. But that defensive line, I don't see Notre Dame running on Georgia.
We've got two probably top 15 picks coming off either side of the line. Jalen Walker, Mikael Williams. We've got a first-round safety and Malachi Starks. Dalen Everett, for some reason, he is pedestrian all year, and when he plays Texas, he just becomes good at football. So hopefully he can kind of let that ride into the playoffs. But linebackers, Small Munden, C.J. Allen. We've got fast linebackers, edge rushers that make your day miserable, a secondary that, while shaky, can step up.
Yeah. I think it's back to the old Georgia defense from 2022. I think you guys are healthy now. And I got to tell you, nobody talks about this, but Kirby Smart, in my view, should be a candidate for Coach of the Year. There's a reason he looks so exhausted and stressed out all the time. He had to endure an 8 overtime victory, but because he's got so many moving parts to balance with the injuries and now with Beck, and he's been able to motivate this team where I think Georgia is playing its best ball right now. I would love to see Notre Dame and Georgia. I think we're going to see it, and that will determine if my prediction had any merits. I suspect Georgia wins that game by 13 to 17 points.
I could see it. Listen, Notre Dame, they're ranked at 5. That's really cool. For some reason, the College Football Playoff Committee just forget that week 2 happened. They did not get penalized whatsoever for losing at home to NIU.
No, they didn't. How do you lose? Does Northern Illinois, they actually have a football team?
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know too much about it until I saw them go into South Bend. Not only did they beat Notre Dame, they beat them in South Bend. On the other hand, though, South Carolina, the hottest team in the country, with Lenora Sellers, who is on fire right now, and a defense that is playing at an elite level.
Yeah.
Just because they had 3 losses, that's it. And they were stuck behind Ole Miss because Ole Miss beat them. Well, I don't think head-to-head matchups, I think that should matter. But you should also consider other things like the rest of your schedule, particularly at the end of the year. South Carolina should be in this game. And you know what I'd like to see? Instead of Indiana, South Carolina against Notre Dame in South Bend, the winner to play Georgia and Dallas.
That would be fun. But so the problem with South Carolina is, and I've said this kind of all year, they got screwed out of that LSU game.
Oh, that was horrible.
They should be 10-2, if not 11-1, because they should have beat Bama.
Well, in the LSU game, I'm sure you remember when poor Garrett Nussmeier throws that ridiculous interception. He's the South Carolina defender is by the goal line returning the ball, and then one of I believe it was South Carolina's lineman, whoever it was, knocked Nussmeier on his ass. Well, Nussmeier was running to try to defend the play. How is that a personal foul?
It's not. It shouldn't. It is, obviously, but it's not. And it was like they'll call that roughing the passer, but when Gunnar Stockton gets murdered on national television, it's not targeting. So, I mean, it is what it is, and it's already happened. But South Carolina should have won that game. Should have beat Bama. They should be 11-1, honestly. And Georgia at that point, wouldn't even played last weekend.
Yeah.
I mean, South Carolina, Georgia should have lost to Florida. Florida's quarterback doesn't get hurt, and I was at the game. And Florida's quarterback doesn't get hurt, we lose that game.
Yeah, and that's another thing. Dare I say it, a team with 5 losses someday in some universe might be justified getting a shot because Florida at the end of the year knocked off Ole Miss. And, with that murderous schedule they had.
Oh, my God.
They were probably – I would leave them out probably, but there's an argument that could be made that they would beat Indiana and that they would smoke Boise State. But Maybe the Broncos are better than I'm giving them credit for. I think they're really, really good. I did think they looked good against UNLV, but I'm not sure they're among the top 12. I think South Carolina is the one who got screwed, not Alabama. But we'll see how it plays out. I think Georgia's in the best position to win it all. So premature congratulations with cautious optimism.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for calling to the show. I appreciate it. Please, call in the future. You always make some great comments, and I enjoy the discussion.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ryan. All right, that's Ryan, a UGA fan and a very knowledgeable college football fan. We always appreciate him calling in with intelligent comments and providing a stimulating discussion. So the last thing I'm going to say on this show relates to what we've been talking about, the college football playoffs and some of the problems with it. But let's talk about that after the committee's selections yesterday. First round, number 12, Clemson, and number 5, Texas in Austin. The winner of that game will go to the Peach Bowl to face number 4 seed Arizona State. I see. Oh, you changed it to Demish fan. Okay, I got it now. Thanks for letting me know. Good to see you. So, winner of Clemson, Texas goes against Arizona State in the Peach Bowl. Arizona State, number 4 seed. Then we've got Tennessee and Ohio State in Columbus. The winner to go to the granddaddy of them all, the Rose Bowl, to face the Ducks of Oregon. Their offense looked electric against Penn State. The defense, a bit suspect. Then we've got number 11, SMU in the first round in Happy Valley against the Penn State Nittany Lions. The winner of that game goes to the Fiesta Bowl to face the Broncos of Boise State, who Ryan believes are legit this year, and maybe he's right. We will certainly see in the Fiesta Bowl. Last first-round game, Indiana at Notre Dame in South Bend, a battle of Indiana. I suspect that every single person in Indiana will be watching that game. The winner faces who? That team from Athens, the Georgia Bulldogs. That is going to be a great game. That's going to be in Dallas, Georgia, the number 2 seed. Georgia has a great path to the semifinals and ultimately the national championship. When I look at these teams, there's a lot we could say and a lot that's been covered in the discussions we've had, so I'll keep it brief. I think the playoff committee did a pretty good job. I don't think they were perfect, and of course, we don't demand perfection. I think they did a pretty good job. I think there's some flaws, though, that may be illuminated as these playoffs proceed. One of the issues is automatic bids. I have an issue with automatic bids and automatic buys. I'm not so sure why a conference champion should automatically be in the playoffs, because some years conferences are good and some years conferences are bad. Some years conferences are deeper than others and therefore justify more teams from one conference and no teams from another. So it kind of prohibits that season-by-season individualized analysis and leads to putting teams in that may not be the best 12 teams and leaving teams out that, in fact, are. And I would argue that is the case with South Carolina. I have a problem with automatic buys. When I look at basically the layout of this, and I think to myself, the top 4 teams in the country should be getting the buys. Never in a million years would I have thought the buys would go to Boise State and Arizona State. Oregon and Georgia, yes. Boise State and Arizona State, no. I don't think that that's fair, and I think that the committee is going to change that. I also think we've got to consider how we're going to factor in disparities in strength of schedule as it affects how we view wins and losses. Okay? Now, let me be clear about something. Just because a team has an easy schedule and another team has a really hard schedule, that doesn't mean that the team with the easy schedule is not better than the other team with the harder schedule. Okay? So when you talk about schedule strength disparities, I don't think it should be used to determine who's a better team. It should be used to give more leeway to the teams that have more losses and understand that those additional losses may justify putting that team in over a 1-loss team or a 2-loss team because they've had to play games that the other teams haven't that were far more difficult. And conversely, if the team with the better record but the weaker schedule had played those games, they would likely have a much different record. So how that plays out is going to be interesting. But I think what the committee needs to really consider and change is the automatic buys and the automatic bids. Hopefully, as we see this play out, they will revisit it. But I think they did an okay job. I'd give them a B. And like I was saying to Ryan, even if they included too many teams, even if I think there should be less teams in a college football playoff, they're still getting the best teams. Okay, it's not like by including more teams, you're leaving out what would have been in my top 4. You're still including them. My argument is you're including too many. But including too many doesn't necessarily mean that you're still not getting to the right result, albeit in a circuitous way. I see a comment here from Mr. GTA, the Michigan fan, which makes me – I think I got it. This is a Michigan fan. What do I think of the Michigan-Ohio State game? I thought that Michigan's defense was elite. I thought that they dominated Ohio State's offensive line. I thought they came ready to play. And I thought their defense played like the Michigan defense of last year. I thought schematically they completely confused Ohio State. And I think they came in there with a hunger to go into the horseshoe. And despite everybody's predictions that Ohio State, with its $20 million roster in the horseshoe, with 100,000 screaming fans, was going to win by 17. I believe the spread was 19.5 or 20. Michigan, as an elite institution, said, no way. Michigan came in there with pride, and that defense played with aggression. And when it mattered, they got the stops they needed and exposed Ohio State's offensive line and offense generally. So congratulations to Michigan. You know, a great, great program that's had some ups and downs this year, but that's to be expected because Michigan lost, 7 or 18 players, many of whom went to the NFL, and they lost J.J. McCarthy. And J.J. McCarthy was the leader of that offense and, the leader of a team that deservedly won the national championship. What about USC? Because I know you're a USC fan. Oh, gosh, I may have to dedicate another show to that, but a good question. I think the problem with USC is I don't think Lincoln Riley is really a great head coach. I hate to say that because he seems like a really nice man, and he's had some great successes at Oklahoma. But one thing I noticed about Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma is that he often had dynamic, electric offenses, but really weak defenses. I thought his philosophy was that no matter how bad his defense, he could always outscore the opposing team. Well, that didn't work in Oklahoma. And he brought that philosophy to USC. And that was exposed last year when they went, I believe, 7-5 with a very bad defense. And then Lincoln Riley tried to make some adjustments. He hired some great new coordinators like D'Anton Lynn. But I think that USC right now, because of his intense focus or exclusive focus on offense like it was at Oklahoma, I think USC's personnel on defense is in a very, vulnerable spot. And I think we saw that this year with its 6-6 season, in which the defense, while better, increased to maybe average from poor. And that's just not going to be enough. The other issue I have with USC, and I've said this in the past, is I did not agree with USC joining the Big Ten. I thought it would be very problematic for USC for a couple of reasons. First, you're going to require these kids 3 times a year, and sometimes in successive weeks, to travel across the country. They are going to travel across the country sometimes into very cold weather. Traveling across the country 3 times a year to play a football game in a hostile stadium is mentally and physically exhausting. Okay, so I thought that the cumulative effect of that might affect USC and cost them games they should otherwise have won. Hey, Detective Loki, thanks so much for showing up. Appreciate it. Was just talking about Michigan and congratulating them on a absolutely inspirational effort against Ohio State in the horseshoe. The second thing I thought was the Big Ten is no joke. The Big Ten is a very physical conference, and USC is going to have problems matching that physicality, especially with the schemes they run and the weaknesses they have on the offensive line and the recruiting failures that they've had. I thought USC would run into trouble against teams like Michigan, and certainly they did. I thought USC would struggle. I didn't think they would struggle and lose to Maryland, but I predicted a 7-5 or an 8-4 season, and they went 6-6. So I think it's the combination of, number one, Lincoln Riley, I do not believe is the right man for the job. I think he should be an offensive coordinator either at an elite college football program or in the NFL. Number two, the traveling over the course of a season is going to lead to fatigue and the cumulative effect of that. And the weather change is going to cause issues. Number three, you're going to a conference where your schedule is going to be immeasurably more difficult than it was in the past. And I didn't think USC was ready for that. For those three reasons, I thought we'd struggle this year, and we did. And I think we're going to continue to struggle. It's my honest opinion. I think that for USC to get back to the USC of old, it's got to get back to winning in the trenches. People talk about scheme and nuance and all of these things. Thanks, Detective Logie. Hope you're doing well, too. Great to see you. But when it comes down to it, football is pretty simple. You have to kick the other side's ass in the trenches. As Nick Saban would say, you got to make their asses quit. USC isn't doing that. And now they're in the Big Ten, where the Big Ten is physical and tough. And I think it's not going to bode well for USC, given Riley's philosophy, the repeated travels across the country, and ultimately the strength of the difficulty of the schedule. So that's my answer to that question. And with that, guys, we will conclude this show. But before we do so, Detective Loki says, I don't think Riley's the guy. The man can win a Heisman and produce draft picks, but head coach is so much more than that. Detective Loki, I agree 100%. I don't think Riley really is a head coach. I think Riley is most likely an offensive coordinator. I don't think he was ready for the head coaching job at USC, and I think he believed he could bring the philosophy he had at OU to USC and succeed, meaning have a great offense like with Caleb Williams and not really emphasize defense and simply outscore opponents. Well, Caleb Williams wasn't going to be there forever, and Caleb Williams, had his own issues. And, in my opinion, the best offense is a good defense. And if you look at Lincoln Riley's philosophy and you compare it to Jim Harbaugh's philosophy last year at Michigan, Michigan won the national championship because their defense was so elite. And because Jesse Minter, one of the best defensive coordinators I've seen in a while, that defense was very difficult to score on. And when the defense is as elite as Michigan's, it takes a lot of pressure off the offense. And you combine that with someone like J.J. McCarthy and a very efficient and at times potentially explosive offense, you get the results you get, like you did against Alabama, shutting down Jalen Milroe and scoring just enough to win. Harbaugh's and Michigan's philosophy is a national championship winning philosophy. Riley's is not. I still think it was the wrong move to go to USC. I do too. I think Lincoln Riley is going to be fine. I think he'll stay there a few more years. USC, there's a huge buyout, so USC will struggle, or not struggle, but USC will probably not want to have that type of buyout, give him that type of buyout. But I think ultimately Riley's going to leave on his own accord within 3 years. And I think there's a future for him as an offensive coordinator, but not as a head coach. So thank you guys for the great questions. I really enjoyed the show and the discussions. Thanks, to Durial and to Ryan for calling in and for your comments. It's going to be an exciting month of college football, and I can't wait for it to start as the first round of playoff begins in just a couple of weeks. We will be back here a week from today at 7 p.m. We are going to preview the Kansas State game, Rutgers versus Kansas State in the Rate Bowl. We're going to preview that, and we are going to talk about recruiting. And there's going to be a big surprise on this show coming soon, and I will certainly let you know when it happens. But I can assure you, it's something you'll be wanting to tune into. So thanks everyone for being here, and I hope you have a great evening. Take care.